responsive reading. For everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven. A time to be born, and a time to die. A time to break down, and a time to build up. A time to weep, and a time to laugh. A time to mourn, and a time to dance. A time to throw away stones, and a time to gather stones together. Welcome to Fountain Street Church. I am Roberta Talbot Rossi, attempting to share with you how on earth did I get here. Coming to Fountain Street Church, why am I here? Coming, like many, out of a personal story, the immigrant's dilemma, being taught to fit in, and going to Sunday school and being taught never to lie. I was reminded by my older brother that many things can't be helped, but stupid is forever. And at an early age, my mind was made aware that there are many different ways of understanding one another and truth and the God question. My training religiously started out quite conservative, and I have been glad for that. There is a conservative conundrum within me. I still work with that. I do believe that there is a spirit that impels a writing down of things that we consider are from divine source. And yet, that same printed word tells me that my Jesus says he's leaving a spirit to guide me in all truth. Hello? Written words, living words. And I live in that tension. And I understand many of you do too, live in the tension of getting from here to there in the different places inside us, our soul. So what, as my brother would say, what good are you on the earth? The family was fine before you came. And where am I in this world and in this church? What have I to do? Well, I have learned in the poetry group to grow my soul as well as my mind, hearing other authors. It's a great group, as iron sharpens iron. Try that poetry group. And I have gone to the yoga group here, not to twist my body in a pretzel, but to wrap my soul around the inner life. At 74 years, if I can do it, I want to encourage you to think about it. At this point, financially, I can no longer give the great amounts I would like to give, and I've had to learn to put the mind and the soul together in my place in this world. What do I want to sponsor the most in the last gifts I may have to give? I think that's very practical, not at all morbid. I am able to support a CSA, a community-sponsored ag farm. And knowing how tenuous their finances are, I have elected to not take their produce, but simply to invest in them. Also, I now have my limited crafting ability down to one simple crochet pattern of ski hats. Now, my family is well provided with ski hats. And so I have turned to Heartside, and I want to recommend to you that you also consider gifting Heartside with whatever your skills might be, even to sending something really good, not something secondhand. So all in all, my experience in Park, I was there before here also. My experience here at Fountain Street, I think, is summed up here from William Wordsworth. And I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns and the round ocean and the living air and the blue sky and in the mind of man, a motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thoughts, and rolls through all things. For me, that rolls through Fountain Street Church, too. You belong here.
As some of you know, it is my habit when I can to spend part of my Saturdays in a synagogue. The guy's got to go to church, you know, and I don't get to sit in the pew when I'm here, so I go there. And part of that tradition, every week in fact, is something called Mourner's Kaddish, a prayer that's spoken several times through the service. It begins and ends the worship. So the last time it is said, the formal conclusion of the worship service, it is led by those who are mourning, defined as anyone who's lost a parent, a spouse, a grandparent, or a child or grandchild within the last 12 months, or at this time of year in years past. So I was in synagogue yesterday, And it comes time for mourner's Kaddish, and I'm not Jewish, you all know that. And so I don't generally take part, but May is a hard month for me. It's the month my father died, the month my first son died. And so I stood up. As we begin to read this list, a list perhaps that we should not read but once a year, but perhaps more often, because they don't exist but one day of the year. For you, they exist all year long. I invite you, if you wish, if it is appropriate to you, to stand in their honor for someone dear to you. It is not enough to hear their name. We have to be present as we would if someone said your mother's name and she wasn't there, you'd stand up for her, wouldn't you? And it doesn't matter if it's your mother, a friend, someone dear to you. These names are precious not because of the syllables they utter, but because of the lives they touched. And if anyone on this list touched your life, when I read their name, feel free to stand in their honor. Let us now, with prayerful eyes and ears and hearts, lift up those who in the past year completed their earthly life among us, but have left us a legacy of life that still lives. Benjamin Benstead, Kathleen Bucknam, Meredith Donahoe, Connie Francis, Melvin C. Goolsby, Peter Harrigan, Dr. Donald Hesselschwert, Victoria Johnson Hoffius, Frederick Bureau Horton, Winifred Winnie Kellogg, Mary J. Banta Court, Shirley LaBelle, Virginia A. Lehman, Arlene E. MacDonald, John L. McLean, Terry Jean McFarland Harper, Mary Cornelia M.C. Porter, Leona Alaben Rasmussen, Marjorie Jean Reed, Irene Stevie Robertson, Jola Royer, Christine Gilmore Tompkins, Betsy Vandercook, Dr. John L. Jack Weezy, Morley R. Wilson, Amy K. Mulder Wotel, Jeffrey L. Ipma, Wilma R. Zollinger. Born of the sun, they traveled a short while towards the sun and left the vivid air signed with their honor. V'sei shalom b'marav hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. May the one who brings peace in high heavens bring peace to all of us, to all the world, and to all Israel, and let us say, Amen. If ever there was a prayer or music, that would be it, I would think. It's hard to say much afterward, but that is my task. It's also hard to believe that 2 weeks ago today, I was in church elsewhere. It wasn't a formal church, but like the adagio, there are some things that are so spiritually potent they don't need to be defined. I spent Sunday afternoon 2 weeks ago in the Peace Park of Hiroshima, Japan, surrounded by the monuments and promises and memories of that. Well, I'll save that for another day. But I was profoundly in church that day, I can assure you. My mind is in many ways still back in Japan, where I was immersed for 3 weeks, spent touching upon as many Buddhist temples and Shinto shrines and gardens as I could lay my eyes upon. A pilgrimage, in fact, several days of which were through the mountains, up and down many a hillside. I'd love to tell you all about it, but not only do I not have enough time today, it needs to ripen a bit. You know, the experience is still precious, but it doesn't have form. I think I'm in the same position as a Wellesley College professor was back in 1893, who, having grown up in Massachusetts, went on a trip out to Colorado and saw the Rocky Mountains for the first time. Remember the first time you saw big mountains? Well, she went up Pikes Peak and from the top looked out onto the eastern plains. You can see a long way, especially in those days before automobile exhaust. And she was so moved that she wrote a poem, but the poem wasn't quite done for her, so she had to revise it, and 20 years later, it came out like this. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountain majesties above the fruited plain, America, America, God shed his grace on thee and crown thy good with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. Lots of rituals are attached to Memorial Day, and some people will sing this song, a very moving song it is. Probably what will stick in our throats mostly will be the sound of taps in cemeteries. It always makes our throat close up a little, doesn't it? And well, it should. But of course, there are other rituals. There is the thirst-quenching sound of opening that first cold bottle of beer on the back porch, the smell of the grill firing up, and the anticipation of incinerating bits of dead animals for our pleasure. Here at Fountain Street Church, we observe our own memorial, as we just did a few moments ago, for those in our church community who died in the past year, but whom we still hold as living in us. I salute those of you who rose in honor of someone you loved, to remind us that they are still with us. My mind on Memorial Day always goes back to the 2 little New England towns I served in my first decade of clergy life. They were small towns, and their observances were therefore rather small. Each of them had a town band. It was a voluntary band, and I volunteered as a trombone player. The parade went from one cemetery to the next, where the veteran graves were marked with flags, and one of the local clergy would offer a prayer, which meant that once a year somewhere I had to hand my trombone to someone else and put on my sport jacket and walk to the middle and think of something noble and prayerful, and then walk back and pick up my Sousa again. Yes, it was rather amateurish compared to the big parades in big cities or in D.C., and there will be all sorts of polished rituals. But I have to say, those little parades in those little towns felt very honest in ways the more polished program does not. Why? Because when we hollered out those names, some of them were names not only of people we knew, but of ancestors of people we knew. Those towns and those names went back 200 and 300 years. Descendants stood and listened to their ancestors' names get read. They were part of the community, not just part of a war. Very much like when we read our names, the names mean nothing to someone watching on YouTube, but to us they are precious. Even when it rained, we marched. Even when the mosquitoes were eating us alive, we marched. It was our duty. Duty is a rather hokey notion these days, I think, and old-fashioned, and now that I'm verging on old age, I'm allowed to talk about it. But also because our social climate has shifted in the past 50 years. I grew up with the notion of doing one's duty. I was a Boy Scout. I was told that these are certain things one did. But starting in the 1970s, which we all were told was the me decade, turned out to be the me era. We are all now bound for self-fulfillment, and we're always looking for meaningful things. We have bucket lists to make sure we have experiences before we die. At least according to one estimate, over 20% of us, 1 in 5, call themselves libertarians, a philosophy that says the individual and the individual's liberty is the most important thing that matters, and it's the chief concern of the state to preserve that. And I'm not disputing our personal liberties as being important. And in fact, liberal religion is very much a libertarian endeavor. You get to think what you think. I can't tell you. You can believe whatever you want, even nothing, and I can't stop you. You can say anything you want about me, and I can't stop you. I've often said that the liberal church is really the church of you're not the boss of me. We have an individualism of our own working for us. But as you know, we're all grown-ups in this room, aren't we? Sometimes our greatest strengths can also be our greatest weakness if we're not attentive. Gordon Marino, professor at St. Olaf College, posted an article in the New York Times last week that got a lot of attention. He's talking about the perils of the individualism we live with. He writes, student advisees often come to my office rubbing their hands together, furrowing their brows as they ponder life after graduation. And my knee-jerk reaction has always been, well, what are you most passionate about? Marino then reflects on that. The faith that my likes and my dislikes or my sense of meaning alone should decide what I do is part and parcel of the gospel of self-fulfillment. He refers to a fellow professor, Miya Tokumitsu, who writes, while do what you love sounds harmless and precious, it is ultimately self-focused to the point of narcissism. Marino comes back to reflect that Nelson Mandela did not have a bucket list, nor did Martin Luther King. Centuries ago, the great Rabbi Hillel asked 2 really important questions. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? But if I am only for myself, who am I? The question, who am I? The identity question, the individual question. The central thing that we hold up is that right to ask that question, who am I and what should I be and what should I believe, cannot be answered unless you also ask, whose am I? Duty is to that which you belong. To whose? Who can call you to account? Who can make you think twice or even stop something? Well, I'll give you a quick story. In my college years, full of my new sense of adult freedom, I remember visiting my great-grandmother, who was about 4 foot nothing and about 75 pounds. And in her presence, I had the effrontery to use a few profanities rather casually. Not vulgarities, I mean profanities. And she shot me a look and told me to stop it or she'd wash out my mouth, and she meant it, and I stopped. She could call me to account. Whoever, whatever can do that are the whos to whom you owe a duty. We all have them in our families, some of our friends, perhaps an employer. But I'm here to talk about your nation today. It is Memorial Day, and we're thinking about the people whose names are in our tower, who when someone said salute, they did so and paid for it. Now, I'm not here to talk about patriotism, the expression of one's love for country. I'm not here to talk about singing songs or wearing flags. I'm talking about what your country demands of you that you should consider doing. And if you don't, you should feel a little bad when you don't, that they can call you to account. Now, I come to this, as I said, because I have a deep sense of duty. Maybe it's a generational thing, maybe it's my own neurosis, but as a Boy Scout, I was taught to say an oath that I still remember, and it starts with words that still define my response to life. On my honor, I will do my best to do my duty to God and my country. You know, in Boy Scouts, you could earn religious awards if you were Protestant or Catholic. The Protestants got awards called God and Country. If you were Catholic, you got the Latin version, Deo et Patria. But the assumption was that you had a duty to both your God and your country. Of course, our libertarian streak tugs at that. You're not the boss of me. Not just in church, but in life. We hear lots of talk on political radio and TV about individual freedom and how the government is treading on it at every opportunity. And sometimes when we look at what the NSA is doing, we know they're not entirely wrong. But I also learned as a Boy Scout that every right comes with an equal responsibility, and every liberty comes with an equal liability. As they say, freedom is not free. Question government, yes, all day long. Call it to account, but remember, your government questions you and calls you to account and has a duty for you. Let me name a few. One is obvious, our duty to serve in times of war, as Memorial Day is about. My father enlisted, didn't wait to get drafted. Most men did not. It was his duty. He was only 17. He didn't know anything, but he knew he should go. Millions did, in fact, and even those who conscientiously objected to the war served in other ways. We should honor them all. Whether they lived or died, that's a duty they rose to. Today, fewer than 1% of Americans serve in the armed services. As they used to say in Congress, I'm going to fight to the very last drop of his blood. Are we allowing too few to carry too much on our behalf? Perhaps we need national service. Now, I quivered like a little boy at the thought of being drafted, but I didn't ask for a deferment. I only dodged that bullet, forgive me, because they stopped asking men to serve. My number was waiting to come up. Why? Because I knew that if they didn't take me, it would be somebody else, and it would probably be a darker, poorer kid than me, but also because I believed that we owe our country our time when it asks for it. And let's remember that the whole anti-war movement that some of us remember with some degree of fondness, if not pride, began because those young men knew they were going to be called to serve in a war they did not love. What would it mean if our nation returned to a time where everyone was at risk? Everyone could be called. What would it mean if perhaps, in addition to all of us being at risk of serving, every time someone declared a war, we had to agree to a war tax and pay for it out of our pockets, not off the books, not buried inside the budget somewhere? What if they said, let's have a war, and every one of you's got to pony up $500 a year? Would you be so ready to join that war? National service means we all stand in harm's way and therefore need to have a role in making decisions about when we go there. Okay, here's another. How many of you have groaned, even cursed, when you got a jury notice in your mail? Oh, damn, juries. I hate jury duty, and it is boring. I've done it 4 times. It was a waste of my time each and every... No, it wasn't, and that's my point. If defending the nation in war should be incumbent on everyone, whether they want to go or not, in some way or another, where do any of us go off saying, well, I'll let someone else decide whether someone else goes to prison? Our criminal justice system is in crisis. There are people in state prison in our state serving life sentences because they smoked marijuana. Well, that won't happen to me, no. But maybe if a few more of us watched the criminal justice system up close, maybe if we were ready to stand in judgment, we'd be more ready to say, wait one cotton-picking minute. Is this the way we should be treating our citizens? Because guess what? If we're not number one in a lot of things, we are number one in incarcerated citizens. Yes, we incarcerate a higher percentage of Americans than any other nation incarcerates of their own people. Even better, we have more people in jail than any other nation has of their citizens in jail. We are great at putting people in prison. Where do we come off refusing to be part of that? We hear lots of talk about taxes. Taxes are onerous. Taxes are too high. Taxes should be lower. And they're never more welcome than a jury summons, I know that. We are all just on the far side of the IRS bill. We know what it was about. It is hard. And most of us pay them without becoming irate. And of course, we should debate taxes. Long ago, we discovered the Supreme Court told us in the 19th century the power to tax is the power to destroy. It must be monitored. It must be questioned. But why are we as citizens more interested in questioning the government than why large entities, corporations that are now people with the right of speech, do not pay their taxes as much as you do? And they do it legally because they have lawyers that write the laws who then enforce the laws while you are left holding the bill. Why are you not more outraged? Why are we not more outraged that billions of dollars, meaning schools, veterans benefits, police, don't get paid? Where does anyone come off evading their tax duty on the premise that it'll hurt my business? Well, it hurts my business to pay taxes, but I write the check. Pony up, guys. That's what we should be talking about. Yeah, complain about taxes when they're too high, but complain about those who are making them a little higher by not carrying their share of the load. You know, if someone said, I'm drafting you, but I'm not drafting you because you're a friend of my friend in Congress, that would be outrageous. That's what's happening in our tax code. We should be outraged. Fourth, this is the tough one. A few weeks ago, I got a phone call. I kind of sensed it was coming because I have a son who works in politics. The woman on the other end said, Fred, we'd like you to run for office. I heard that. Now, by every measure, it was impractical. I have a job. The job they wanted me to run for pays less than you pay me. By every measure, it was improbable. How can I do this? You know, church and state. It was all but impossible. And yet, a deep part of me wanted to do it. Not because I wanted to win, not because I want to campaign, but because serving is our duty. We say, why aren't there better people in Congress and the State House? I'm looking at the better ones right now. Carol Townsend is the one exception. Thank you. If we don't like our taxes, we should change them. If we don't like our politicians, we should change them. Yes, it's difficult, but I felt like a shirker, even though I know today that politics has become a business. There is, in fact, the political industrial complex. And if we wonder why our government is for sale, it's because the people who operate it are bought and paid for, and we don't do anything about it because, hey, you know, that's not my problem. You've got to be part of the solution, not just not part of the problem. The whole point of democracy, as far as I can tell, is that the people do it. You may remember that I recited the Gettysburg Address back in November, the 150th anniversary. Do you remember, all of us remember how it ends? That government of the people, by the people, for the people shall not perish from the earth. And right now, according to a study being published in Princeton using data drawn from 1,800 different policy initiatives from 1981 to 2002, I am quoting, Two professors conclude that rich, well-connected individuals on the political scene steer the direction of the country regardless or even against the will of the majority of voters. Economic elites and organized groups representing business have substantial independent impacts on U.S. policy, while mass-based interest groups and average citizen have little or no independent influence. In other words, we are no longer a democracy in any measurable sense. We are an oligarchy. We have been bought and we have paid for it, and it's now their country. And we can rant about Citizens United and McCutcheon and this, and we can talk about all this, and you saw that quote from John Stuart Mill, frequently attributed to Edmund Burke: bad men need to do nothing more than compass their ends, than that good men should look on and do nothing. That's the reason. We are millions. Part of the reason that we're not running the country is that we stopped doing it. We became a client country, a consumer country. We get our politics like we get our news from the television. We take part in politics the way we take part in going to the buyer. We buy what we like. We leave behind what we don't. A perfect storm of individualism, indifference, ignorance, and indolence has made us a modern oligarchy. The remedy, of course, comes in many forms, and one of them perhaps is that national service. You know, our former president said we should be a nation of owners, and he's right, but I don't mean real estate, I mean the country. When you put your life at risk for your country, I think you're a little more likely to take part in its peacetime efforts as well. At least you could. Another part is education. I read the Michigan State's educational standards for civics and social studies. It's 80 pages long. It's a lot. But I can boil it down to this. Of 16 semester credits needed to graduate from high school, one half of one semester is devoted to civics. The other half is devoted to free market economics. I wonder how that happened. Now, a half a semester might be enough to get you to drive a car, but I'm not sure I want anyone right out of driver's ed running my country. We need to do better at that. But it's more than education. The sense of responsibility and duty don't come from books, but from people. You know, I tell parents when they drop off their kids at our character school that the little secret you don't realize is that you do more religious education than we do. We help you do it. Yeah, the character school's an experience, but your kids are learning how to believe and what to believe by watching you. And your children are watching you about being citizens and their neighbors. How many of us take part the way our parents or our grandparents did? Cable TV has had a bad influence, I have to agree, but American workers work more hours per week than any other developed nation. We come home dog-tired. We don't have time to go to the PTA. We're busy eating and napping. Maybe if we didn't have to work 60 hours a week, we could actually be part of the community. But guess who benefits by having us work harder? Do the math. You now understand. 3 ideas I've just given you. National service, education, community involvement. They may not even be the best ones, but I've gotten you thinking about duty today, and that was my point. Of course, when Lincoln gave his Gettysburg Address, what people didn't notice right away is that he wasn't dedicating the cemetery, he was dedicating the people. That from these honored dead, we take increased devotion. Our duty on Memorial Day is not to hear the bugler or go to the parade. Do that. Not to choke up, and you should do that. Our duty is not to pray for the dead, but as Mother Jones said, to work like hell for the living. Our duty is not to revere the past, which is worthy of our reverence, but to persevere for a future worth remembering. Our duty is not to take off our hats and bow our heads, but to roll up our sleeves. This week, Jews started reading from the book of Numbers in the annual cycle of the Torah reading. In Hebrew, though, it's called Bamidbar, which means in the wilderness. And rabbis wonder if this isn't the period in the Torah when the people, having received the word from Sinai, now have to live it. And I'm wondering, If we're in a spiritual wilderness as a nation, we have a Torah, we have a Declaration of Independence, we have a Constitution, the Gettysburg Address, Lincoln's second inaugural, the New Colossus by Emma Lazarus. We have Franklin Roosevelt's For Freedom speech. We have Martin Luther King speaking from the Lincoln Memorial. We have a Torah of teaching about America. And here we are in the wilderness. Maybe it's time to learn it and live it so that maybe that promised land we all think we're in might someday actually come into view. I pray it is so. May these words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be found true in thy sight, thou who art my rock and my Redeemer.